Welcome to Hazard Communication Training under the Globally Harmonized System, also known as GHS. Brought to you by Compliance Kings, LLC, a Texas-based health and safety company. Upon completion of this course, you should understand the difference between physical and health hazards as defined by OSHA concerning chemicals. You should also be able to identify several different types of physical and health hazards. You will know the difference between acute and chronic health effects of chemical exposure. You will know the GHS format for safety data sheets and requirements for labeling under the new standard. You should be able to identify GHS pictograms and the hazards associated with each. You will learn ways to identify a release of hazardous chemicals, and you will understand ways to protect yourself from the hazards associated with chemicals. At the end of the training model, you will take a test to determine your understanding of the material. You must score an 80% or better to pass and receive certification. All employers that expose their staff to chemicals are required to have a written Hazcom program. The program should cover employee training upon initial assignment and any time a new chemical is added to their workspace. Training should cover the following topics: physical and health hazards associated with each chemical in the workspace, safety data sheets, how to read and find relevant information, labeling, how to identify wording elements and pictograms, personal protective equipment, what type is needed for your situation and chemical, how to handle the chemical safely, how to recognize a chemical release, what to do in the event of a chemical release or emergency. Safe signage should be installed in areas to remind employees of the hazards associated with the chemicals in their workspace. A list of all hazardous chemicals shall be maintained and should be available in all workspaces. Safety data sheets, SDS, are required to be available to employees in each workspace and for each chemical. All chemical containers are required to be labeled according to the GHS standard and shall include the 6 required elements. Safe handling procedures are required to be in place for all hazardous products. Personal protective equipment, PPE, is to be provided to all employees at no cost to the employee. Hazards associated with non-routine tasks are to be addressed in the written program. The written program should address hazard communication to multi-employer workplaces, such as would be the case when more than one company is working at a particular work site. Lastly, a copy of the written Hazard Communication Program is required to be available to all employees and contractors for review. OSHA divides chemical hazards into 2 categories: physical hazards and health hazards. Physical hazard means a chemical for which there is scientifically valid evidence that it is a combustible liquid, a compressed gas, explosive, flammable, an organic peroxide, an oxidizer, pyrophoric, unstable, reactive, or water reactive. Health hazard means a chemical for which there is statistically significant evidence, based on at least one study conducted in accordance with established scientific principles, that acute, short-term, or chronic, long-term health effects may occur in exposed employees. The term health hazard includes chemicals which are carcinogens, toxic or highly toxic agents, reproductive toxins, irritants, corrosives, sensitizers, hepatotoxins, nephrotoxins, neurotoxins, agents which act on the hematopoietic system, and agents which damage the lungs, skin, eyes, or mucous membranes. According to OSHA, a chemical is a physical hazard if it is likely to burn or support fire, may explode or release high pressures that can inflict bodily injury, or can spontaneously react on its own or when exposed to water. Health hazards include systemic effects and target organ effects. Some systemic effects include carcinogens or cancer-causing agents, toxic agents which are poisonous to the human body, highly toxic agents which are deadly poisonous to the human body, corrosives which react with metal and other compounds, irritants which cause irritant effects to the skin, eyes, respiratory tract, and other areas, sensitizers cause the user to develop a sensitivity to the compound. Target organ effects include hepatotoxins damage the liver, nephrotoxins damage the kidneys, neurotoxins damage the nervous system, blood hematopoietic toxins damage the engine that produces all types of blood cells, respiratory toxins damage the respiratory system, reproductive toxins cause reproductive harm, cutaneous hazards have potential to cause skin damage, eye hazards damage the eyes. Health hazard indicators consist of acute effects and chronic effects. Acute effects usually occur right away as a result of short-term exposures and are short in duration. Acute effects can be minor or they can be life-threatening. Minor acute effects of exposure to chemicals could consist of mild to moderate headache, mild to moderate sneezing, coughing, watery eyes, runny nose, throat irritation, dizziness, lightheadedness, skin irritation. Major acute effects of chemical exposure could consist of moderate to severe headache, difficulty breathing, blurred vision or loss of sight, confusion, chest pains, burning sensation in the throat, lungs, or chest, loss of consciousness, death. Whatever the symptom or severity, do not ignore your body trying to tell you something is wrong. Move to fresh air and report the conditions to your supervisor immediately. Chronic effects generally occur as a result of long-term exposure and are of long duration. Chronic effects of chemical exposure are generally a follow-on to acute effects. An example is an employee might get dizzy from breathing solvent vapors, acute, but could experience liver damage from repeat or prolonged exposures, chronic. Some examples of chronic effects from chemical exposure could be nausea, difficulty sleeping, irritability, tremors, loss of balance, loss of coordination, cancer, genetic disorders, low sperm count in men, irregular menstrual cycles in women, miscarriage, and birth defects. Once more, whatever the symptom or severity, do not ignore your body trying to tell you something is wrong. Report all ill effects to your supervisor immediately. Factors that affect your level of risks. Toxicity. The more toxic the chemical, the more likely it will cause health problems, even in small amounts. Asbestos and cyanide are considered highly toxic because a very small quantity can cause health effects. Routes of exposure. The way a chemical enters your body affects your risk. Some chemicals, like the pesticide parathion, are very toxic whether they get into the body through the skin, by breathing, or by swallowing. On the other hand, asbestos is only harmful when inhaled or swallowed. A house may have asbestos insulation, but unless the asbestos is disturbed and becomes a dust in the air, it can't be breathed in, so it won't cause harm. Dose. For some chemicals, the higher the amount, the greater the damage. For example, acetone is an industrial solvent that is also found in nail polish remover. It is more dangerous to the worker who uses large amounts than to the person who uses a little nail polish remover. More factors that affect your level of risk. Length of exposure. The longer the exposure, the greater the danger. For example, someone may work with a chemical for half an hour per day, while another person is exposed for 8 hours a day. Also, someone may be exposed for 1 month, while another person may have 20 years of exposure. Reaction and interaction. Some chemicals in combination can create a different chemical that is more hazardous than the original ones, reaction. For example, Ammonia and bleach used together can produce a highly toxic chemical. Some chemicals in combination can increase the likelihood of harm. For example, workers who have been exposed to asbestos increase their likelihood of getting lung cancer if they smoke cigarettes. Individual differences. Chemicals can be more harmful to some people than to others. Lead is much more harmful to small children than adults because it affects their developing brain and nervous system. If two people work with asbestos and one of them smokes, the smoker is more likely to develop asbestos-related lung cancer than the non-smoker. GHS globally standardized all SDS for member countries of the World Trade Organization. This change was needed due to an ever-increasing amount of global trade. Safety data sheets are now required to follow the same format for all member countries under the 16-section format. SDS sections are formatted in the following manner. Section 1. Identification of the substance or mixture and of the supplier. Section 2. Hazards identification. Section 3. Composition information on ingredients, substance, mixture. Section 4. First aid measures. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Section 6. Accidental release measures. Section 7. Handling and storage. Section 8. Exposure controls, personal protection equipment. Section 9. Physical and chemical properties. Section 10. Stability and reactivity. Section 11. Toxicological information. Section 12. Ecological information, non-mandatory. Section 13. Disposal considerations, non-mandatory. Section 14. Transport information, non-mandatory. Section 15. Regulatory information, non-mandatory. Section 16. Other information, including information on preparation and revision of the SDS. 6 required elements of labeling under the GHS standard include 1. Product identifier. 2. Supplier information. 3. Signal word. 4. Hazard pictograms. 5. Hazard statements. 6. Precautionary statements. It is important for you to be able to identify GHS hazard pictograms, which were developed for easy identification of hazards. GHS physical hazard pictograms include gas under pressure, flammables, oxidizers, corrosives, explosives. GHS health hazard pictograms include toxins, respiratory hazards such as carcinogens and mutagens, irritants, corrosives. The last GHS pictogram indicates an environmental hazard. Your employer is required to train you how to recognize the release of a specific hazardous chemical in the workplace. A few obvious ways include the use of sight, smell, sound, hissing leaks or reactions, never taste, touch not recommended due to acids and caustics. Other ways include the use of atmospheric sampling devices, alarms, and pH paper. Your employer should provide you with knowledge of specific physical and health hazards associated with the chemicals in your workspace and ways to protect yourself by training you about their Hazcom program, providing you with an SDS for each chemical in your workspace, ensuring all products are labeled appropriately, ensuring you have the PPE needed, providing emergency action plans and conducting regular emergency drills, providing you with a safe and healthful work environment free from recognized hazards. Even though your employer is committed to providing you with a safe and healthful work environment, it is up to you to follow procedures, obey policies, wear your PPE, and report unsafe or unhealthy conditions to your supervisor immediately. You are now ready to take your test. Good luck.